Welcome to the Carnivore Cast, a podcast focused on the carnivore diet and lifestyle, with practical advice from successful carnivores, citizen scientists, and top researchers. I'm your host, Scott Myslinski, and I'm here to speak with experts and experienced carnivores to get answers to your biggest and meatiest questions while helping you live your best life as a carnivore. Dr. Bret Scher, the Low Carb Cardiologist, is the host of the Low Carb Cardiologist podcast, where he's had many fantastic guests such as Dave Feldman, Lear Keith, Dave Feldman 3 times, actually, I believe, and also the author of Wheat Belly. And now he has a new podcast, the Diet Doctor podcast, in collaboration with Andreas Eenfeldt, which I've personally enjoyed. Just had an interview with Peter Attia as well as one with Gary Taubes, both of which were fantastic. So both definitely go check those both out. And he's also the author of Your Best Health Ever. Dr. Bret is a board-certified practicing cardiologist with exceptional medical and educational credentials, but his real goal is to inspire individuals just like you to promote your own health by adopting healthy lifestyle habits without prescriptions. Welcome to the show, Bret. I'm very excited to have you here.
Well, thanks so much, Scott. That was a great introduction. So yeah, I'm happy to be here as well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Well, we'd love to just start, Bret, with sort of your background and what first got you interested in low carb diets.
Yeah, well, you never forget your sort of first experience that really hits home and kind of hits you right in the gut. And I've had a number of things that got me interested, but one of the biggest things was when I saw a patient in my office, and he's a 60-year-old guy running his own business with a family, like a lot of patients that I see. And, I did my best to help him as best I could within the time frames of the medical practice, right? You can only see people every 15, 20 minutes. You have to address all their medications and address all their medical problems, and then hopefully try and address their lifestyle. And, I remember I seeing this guy, and when he left the office, I was like, I told him to eat less and exercise more and reviewed all his medications, but something just didn't sit right. And, as it happens, 2 weeks later, I get a call from the emergency room that there he is in the ER having a heart attack. And he was one of the lucky ones. He got to the cath lab, got a stent, and was, survived it. Many people don't, unfortunately, but I'd had too many episodes like that to make me realize that I'm not doing everything I can. And especially this guy, because it really hit home with him. He was older for having young kids and had his own business and was stressed out and clearly not paying his health the attention it deserved. And about that same time, I was working with a friend of mine who is a health coach and really promoting low carb and keto. And he convinced me that I needed to start trying it with my clients and my patients. And so I tried it with this one particular patient, and his beer belly went away, and his insulin resistance and diabetes completely improved, and he was feeling better. He was feeling more energetic, and he stayed out of the cath lab, and he stayed out of having trouble with his heart disease. And it was one of those aha awakening moments that, wow, maybe what I've been told all this time isn't the right way, isn't the best way for most people. And there's this whole other world out there, a whole different way to take care of people and help people that they're going to respond pretty well to. And, from there, it was just diving into the science and reading all the books and the articles that were coming out about low carb. And it just made sense. It just made so much sense that this is how you can really touch people and help people in a way that they're going to enjoy, and they're going to feel good, and they're going to thrive. And that's, I've been a convert ever since. I'll never turn back.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Thank you for sharing both of those stories. I can't imagine seeing that and just feeling so obligated to find another way to help them. And I'm curious, from your perspective, what's the problem with the way most people are getting their information on diets and nutrition today?
Yeah, I mean, the main problem is the top-down teaching, whether it's from the Diabetes Association or the Dietitians Associations. They're still hanging on to the low-fat dogma, and it's just based on horrific science that or I should say horrific interpretation of science, right? You can only do so much with science and epidemiological studies, and nutrition science is hard. But the problem is we don't realize that. We don't realize that these interpretations are basically wrong and that the science isn't robust enough to support these interpretations that everybody should be eating low fat. And it's been ingrained in our society for so long, in our teachings for so long, that there comes a point where it's just too hard to reverse course. And that's clearly where we are now. I mean, all you have to do is look at the obesity epidemic and look at the diabetes epidemic and look at the epidemic of any chronic health condition to say something has gone wrong here. Nutrition is a huge part of that. Our message is wrong and needs to change. But it's just, we're too ingrained in the way we're being taught. And anytime someone's career is built on a certain teaching, a certain dogma, and certain institutions are basically built on promoting one way of doing things, it's very, very slow to change. And then, of course, you've got the financial side of things, right? All the businesses that are built up around the low-fat teachings and all the institutions and the government guidelines. And it's a huge snowball effect. And when I talk to people like Nina Teicholz and Gary Taubes who are taking this on, head on, it seems like too big of a challenge. Like, how could anybody ever think they're going to make any progress, because it's such an uphill battle? But I'm so thankful that they are there fighting that battle, because it needs to change. All these things from the top down need to change. I'm sort of trying to change it from the bottom up, changing it from one individual at a time. But in order to reach, the masses, it's got to change from the top down.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I would argue you're reaching plenty of people, Bret, with your podcast and your blog and all your messages. So don't underplay it. But yeah, it's an incredibly complex system. And I like to say it's not a conspiracy theory. It's just business. And a lot of the incentives just sort of line up that way. And Nina's book, absolutely love the way she lays out the narrative of how, the anti-saturated fat and anti-fat world evolved, and how all these organizations were sort of born out of it, and leading to the recommendations we have today. So going along with that, what level of sort of nutritional knowledge or expertise would you expect the average doctor or cardiologist to have today? And why is there a lot of conflicting evidence out there from these quote unquote experts, on what a heart healthy diet is?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a hard question to answer. But in terms of what I would expect the average doctor, the average cardiologist in their nutritional understanding, the answer is none. And whatever understanding they have is going to be an incomplete understanding, because again, it comes down to not understanding that the science is not strong enough to support the conclusions. And that's the key. I mean, it's so easy to pull up a study and say, oh, look, the people in this population who didn't eat meat did better than those who did. Therefore, it must be the meat. But then you look a little bit closer and, oh yeah, they also smoked more, and they also didn't exercise as much, and they also were eating more refined carbohydrates. But that's not what people see when they first read the studies. They read the abstract, they read the headline, and they say, oh, the meat eaters did worse. Okay, conclusion drawn, move on, next thing. And it's because people like it to be simple. It's hard work to dissect the studies. It's hard work to question everything and to really try and dig into it. So, you can't blame people for wanting to find sort of the quick and easy answer. And unfortunately, though, it's a misleading answer. And, gosh, I struggle all the time when I see these vegan advocates and physician vegan advocates, because at their core, they want to help their patients. And they have people who they are working with who they see get better. But what they don't see is all those who don't get better. What they don't see is when those people fall off and how they can't maintain it. And what they don't see is all the people getting so much better on low carb nutrition, that, there's a whole nother way out there. There isn't just one way. I would never say nobody should be vegan. I'd say, okay, certain people may do very well being vegans with lots of considerations and taking care and supplements and making sure you're getting all the right nutrients and proteins and fats and, your omega-3s and, yada, 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 go on and on and on. There are lots of cautions you have to take. But at the same time, I would say there's a whole nother world out there that hasn't been explored that is even more beneficial for a larger percentage of people, more sustainable, where people are going to feel better, feel more energetic, feel healthier. And that's so important to keep in mind, right? It's not just how one blood test marker looks on a diet. It's the whole picture. It's how is the patient feeling? How are they taking care of themselves because they're feeling better? How's their whole picture looking in terms of their glucose and their insulin, their inflammation, not just one single blood marker, which traditionally has been the LDL. So it's, it's a sort of a roundabout way of dodging and answering your question all at the same time, that we get bad information because of bad interpretation of studies and over-reliance on simple blood markers that don't tell the whole story.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I've gotten to the point where I almost completely disregard all epidemiological evidence because it's so convoluted. You don't know what they controlled for. You don't know exactly how they measured, people's reported nutrient intake, all these things. It's just really complicated. And I think folks really need someone like you who can take them through an individualized approach, monitor them, help them troubleshoot. And so with that, I wanted to ask, why did you decide to move into preventative care? And what would you say the difference is from the average patient experience with, a standard doctor or PCP visit or, prescriptions versus in your preventative care practice?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking. I was actually always interested in preventative care. So when I first did my cardiology fellowship, it was a combined general and preventative cardiology fellowship. So from the beginning, I knew this is the path I wanted to take. Of course, at that time, the teaching was all low fat, low fat. It was actually sort of an Ornish-based prevention program in which I learned. And then getting out into the quote unquote real world and having a regular practice, it was hard to build just a prevention practice. I was in a general cardiology job, and that's when it just started to wear on me to see like how little impact you could really have on people within the confines of this misguided, misinformed, and with misaligned incentives in that type of a setting of a healthcare system. And that's when I knew I just had to do something different, because it was, gosh, when once the curtain is taken over your eyes and you can see things clearly, you just can't keep doing them the same way. So right now with my Boundless Health membership program and with my online consulting, I can really take the time to sit with my patients and spend an hour or 2 hours with them to really figure out what's affecting their health and to help them see their health from a different mindset. It's not all about what are your symptoms, how do we improve your symptoms with medication. It's about what are you doing with your life that's affecting your health? What are your health goals? Because they're certainly not the same for everybody. What are your biggest health challenges? And how do we prescribe a program to get you there? Not a medication. Not how do we prescribe a medication, but how do we prescribe a program to get you on the path to your goals? And it's not, one day you're not at your goal, the next day you are at your goal. It's a constant journey. So how do we keep you on that path, knowing that there are going to be slip-ups, knowing that there are going to be turns and detours, but keeping you on the path after all those to get you keep moving forward, and know that you can achieve your health goals, but you probably can't achieve your health goals within the confines of our current healthcare system. So it's helping people break free of that system to really succeed and transform their health.
Yeah, that's excellent to hear, and really impressed by the work you're doing. And I just wanted to dive into some specific questions about heart health. There are a lot of markers that folks measure and a lot of kind of potentially false signals based on blood values. But what heart health markers do you like to concentrate on, or do you think are most useful to measure over time?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of them, and that's where we fall short, because so many times it's just the standard lipid profile, and even then is misinterpreted. So of course that's the first place everybody starts, the LDL, the HDL, triglycerides, but the triglyceride to HDL ratio is so important, and a big marker of insulin resistance, and in accordance with that, fasting insulin, fasting glucose, a HOMA-IR are very important, but also postprandial glucoses are very important too. So there's the classic oral glucose tolerance test, but you can do it on your own. You just have a standard meal and check your glucose an hour or 2 hours later. That is so powerful and so underused. And those are absolute basics. And then from there, you get into your inflammation markers like your CRP or your fibrinogen. And you can learn so much more about your lipids than just what the numbers are. First you have to be following the particle number or the ApoB rather than just the cholesterol concentration. And then the size and the density and the inflammatory characteristics of the lipids are so important too. And what you see is you see patterns. Those who are insulin resistant or diabetic tend to have the smaller dense LDL, the more inflamed LDL, and that's the more dangerous LDL. Those people who are completely metabolically healthy and insulin sensitive tend to have less amounts of the small dense LDL, less inflammatory markers, less inflamed LDL, and that's the less dangerous LDL. So those patterns exist over and over again, and that's why it's so important to follow all those markers to learn more than just the basics. So, I think those are crucial. And then also, I think people should know their ApoE genetic status, because that can certainly play into whether you're more concerned about cardiovascular disease or Alzheimer's disease, and maybe can help dictate some of your saturated fat intake one way or the other. I think people should know their Lp(a) number. That's not something that changes a lot over time, but certainly know what your baseline number is very important. So, those are a kind of shotgun overview of what I like to see. And then for each individual, which ones you follow sort of depend on what interventions you're making and how things change for them and how they're feeling and whatnot. But those are the basics that everybody needs to know. And unfortunately, most doctors are going to stop at a fasting glucose and a fasting lipid profile and not dig any deeper into all the details.
Yeah, those are great. And I guess in addition to blood tests, Bret, would you also be interested in blood pressure and something like a CAC or CIMT?
Absolutely. So, I went straight to the blood test. In my brain, that was the question.
Yeah, I was asking about that specifically. But
but you're absolutely right. I mean, blood pressure is an incredibly important marker, and as we see people lose weight and feel better on low carbs diets, their blood pressure goes down almost uniformly. And that's so powerful because that's associated with not just heart disease, but also strokes and dementia as well. So, having a low blood pressure over your lifetime is very important. And then coronary calcium scores and CIMT are also invaluable because you're not measuring surrogates of vascular disease. You're actually measuring the vascular disease, which is so important. But again, the importance is interpretation, right? And this is one of the things that drives me crazy about calcium scores. If it's 0, great, all good, you're fine. And it's a good baseline to then follow to see if the changes you're making are leading to vascular injury or not. So if you're 0 now and 3 or 5 years from now, your calcium score is 300, something you were doing was not beneficial. And then it's dissecting down to what it is that it could have been a causative effect. The problem comes with you've been living a standard American diet, you're insulin resistant, and you switch to a low carb diet and 6 months later get a calcium score and it's 500. Then all of a sudden it's like, see, I told you that diet's going to kill you. You have a 500 calcium score. Well, you have no idea if it wasn't the 15 years of the standard American diet that laid down the calcium score, not the 6 months of the low carb diet.
Right.
So there's a danger in interpreting that as well when it's not 0. So that's a problem I have with people running out and getting the calcium scores and not having it evaluated by somebody who can sort of think a little bit deeper than just the knee-jerk reaction of this just popped up and have to stop what you're doing. But it's incredibly valuable as a test to follow. And that's what I really like about the CIMT, the carotid intima media thickness testing. In fairness, the data for outcomes is not as strong or as consistent as it is with the coronary calcium scores. But where I find it most useful is just following it over time. So whatever the absolute number is, check it in 6 months, check it in a year, check it in 18 months, and you can see progression and regression. And that's something that's harder to see with a calcium score. You don't really see regression, but with the CIMT, you can see progression or regression, and you can see it over a shorter time frame. So when you're making specific interventions, or, if you're one of these hyper responders who have a very high LDL, high HDL, low triglycerides, and you're not 100% sure, is this a safe place for me to be or not? You can follow it with the CIMT and see if you're having any progression there. I think that's so valuable.
Yeah, that's great. And one thing, those are excellent points around those markers. One thing, Bret, that you may encounter sometimes, probably less so, because a lot of times I'm sure folks are seeking you out for the low carb perspective. But if you have a patient who's, 40s, 50s, 60s, and their markers are trending in the wrong direction. So say their CAC or CIMT score is getting worse. They're developing higher blood pressure. They're a little bit worried about their lipid panel, whether it's applicable or not. And they've been eating sort of a standard American diet, maybe slightly low fat, not like Denise Minger low fat, but just standard eating out at restaurants, trying to eat sandwiches and pasta and what they think is a heart healthy diet. How do you deal with them getting over the risk of, I want to try low carb, I want to eat more meat, but I'm worried that it'll do damage and make my calcification worse, and I'm scared of that risk. So in other words, the risk of doing nothing and just staying with the default feels like it's less than trying a low carb diet. Does that make sense?
Right. Isn't that crazy? It makes total sense. And when you hear somebody else say it, you're like, that's absolutely crazy. Why would anybody think that? But it's so prevalent. I mean, I do see that quite a bit. And it's because for 30, 40, 50 years, we've been taught that fat is dangerous. And so the first part is always educating them about that falsehood, that we've been led astray and we've been taught the wrong thing. And then showing them, look, here's a fasting insulin level, which will almost always be high in those settings, of 30. And why do you think nobody has ever checked this before? So that's usually sort of an eye-opening thing for a lot of the patients. They're like, yeah, why has nobody checked that before? And, why haven't I got this type of education or this type of workup through my regular doctor? And then you can really sort of have their aha moment and really get into the education of why the information about fat being bad is wrong and what can change when you go to a low carb diet and how that can positively impact their health, and how you can follow different tests to see that we're not just treating people blindly and saying, see you later, but that we're actually going to follow your markers and your metrics and how you're feeling and prove to you that you are doing well and that you're not harming yourself and putting yourself at risk. So, there's a lot of education around it, but the education sinks in so much more when you can show them some sort of aha moment, show them something that hasn't been checked in decades of seeing their regular doctor that seems like so obvious and should be checked, whether it's a fasting insulin or whether it's a HOMA IR or whether it's a more advanced lipid profile or whatever the case may be, to show them that there's so much more information out there that they've just been scratching the surface over the past 20 years.
Yeah, that's a great approach. I really like combining the education with, some empirical evidence. I think that's really, really powerful.
Because we can educate people till we're blue in the face. We have to find a reason for it to stick. There's got to be a reason to get into their psyche and their behavioral change parameters in their brain to get this to stick. So that's frequently what they say, the art of medicine. There's the art and the science of it. And a lot of it is learning how to deal with people and learning how to help people with behavioral change and help people be more open to information.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a really helpful perspective. And Bret, moving beyond the test for a minute, what types of exercise would you advocate for heart health? I was listening to your podcast with Carrie Diulis, and it was interesting to hear you and her go back and forth on, switching between different types of exercise. Obviously, her situation is unique, being a type 1 diabetic. But in general, what types of exercise do you advocate for your patients?
Yeah, exercise is a tough one because everybody comes from a different starting point, basically. And so I sort of take a four-pronged approach to exercise, and you really have to tailor it to the individual because, some people hate exercise. Some people might, like me, love it, and I could do it every day. I wish I had more time for it. And some people absolutely hate it. So you have to really meet people where they are to get them to do it, right? Because you can give them any exercise program, but they're not going to do it if it doesn't fit their life. So the first is just not exercise. Just be physically active. Don't worry about exercise yet. Just be physically active. Our society is such a sit on your butt society, right? We drive in traffic to work. We sit down in front of the computers at work all day. We drive in traffic home. We sit down and have dinner. And we sit down on the couch and watch TV. Like, that probably doesn't describe you and I, but that describes the vast majority of our population. And it's sickening. The buildings are made so the first thing you see when you walk in is the elevator, and you have to go hunting for the stairs. People circle and circle and circle for minutes and minutes and minutes to find the closest parking spot. Like, what is wrong with society that we're doing this? Like, it makes no sense. So it's just little things like moving your body, getting outside for 10, 15 minutes a day and walking. Trying to do simple things like take the stairs. And, it sounds cliche, and I've said it so many times, but every time I see someone take an elevator up one floor and I see them on the next floor as I take the stairs up, it's like, what? Why would you even consider that? So that's the first step. It's just getting people moving their body. Because, say what you want about the blue zone population. I think a lot of the data has been distorted of the blue zone populations. But one thing is consistent among them is they all move their body and they're physically active during the day. But then if you want to talk about not just the basics of health, but now we're talking about longevity and optimal health and transforming your health, that's when you have the next 3 tiers of this 4-layer program. And that's some moderate cardio. So the zone 2 that Carrie Diulis is very fond of right now because it's keeping her blood sugar rock steady. So there's the zone 2 moderate cardio. There's the resistance training, which is so important because muscle mass and strength is crucial. I mean, that's another epidemic among our senior population is the lack of muscle mass, which introduces this whole new way of dying, basically, that was unheard of before you get old. And that's falling and breaking a hip and having complications from that. We don't see that until you basically hit 70, 80, 90 years old. And that can easily be prevented by maintaining muscle mass. So that's one reason for resistance training. But the other reason is it actually improves mitochondrial health and it improves mitochondrial function and insulin sensitivity. So resistance training is crucial. And that doesn't mean, power lifters and all looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It means doing some form of resistance training to maintain muscle mass. And then the interval training. And that's, I'm a huge fan of that. That's one of the harder ones to get people to buy into when they're new to exercise. So I don't usually lead with that. That's kind of down the road for most people once I get them started on an exercise program. But interval training also affects the body in a different way. All 3 aspects of all of these different modes of exercise affect the body differently, and they're going to affect insulin sensitivity and glucose sensitivity and mitochondrial efficiency, body fat percentage and fat burning. I mean, they all target it differently. And that's why I think it's important to spread it out and have a little bit of all of these in a balanced exercise program. But in the beginning, it all comes down to moving your body and being active. And that's frequently the biggest battle I have with people. Not getting them in the gym, not getting them to lift weights, but just getting them off their rear ends and getting them moving.
Yeah, that's a great answer and really holistic. And I like how you start with just moving. I feel very fortunate sometimes to live in Boston and be in a place where I can walk everywhere. I can't imagine just, getting out of the house, getting out of bed, getting into a car, going to work and sitting down. I think that would drive me crazy.
Yeah. And so I just had I got a funny story. I just interviewed, like you mentioned, I had an interview with Gary Taubes on the Diet Doctor podcast. And he told the story actually in relationship to quitting smoking, but I thought it was hilarious that in New York, he had a hard time quitting smoking because you're always walking on the streets and there's always somebody there to bum a cigarette off of it. And then in LA, when he moved to LA, all of a sudden everybody was in their cars. Nobody was walking, so he couldn't bum a cigarette off anybody anymore. So he told it from the perspective of quitting smoking, but I'm thinking, wow, what a better way to live to be walking. Just a shame that means you can bum cigarettes off of people.
Yeah.
But that's the type of societies we need. And there have been these studies that look at what would people give up from a financial standpoint if they could have a job that they could commute to every day, walking or biking. And the studies have concluded somewhere around like 20 to 30% of your salary people would be willing to give up to walk or bike.
Wow.
And that's telling. I mean, and that is so telling, and health would undeniably improve if that were the case.
Yeah, I'm right there. I'm definitely probably north of 30%. It's very important for my well-being. And how about sleep, Bret? How can sleep contribute to heart health and just overall well-being?
Yeah, sleep's another interesting one. The biggest problem with sleep are the people who are like the shift workers and their circadian rhythm is all off. And they're getting poor quality sleep in addition to poor amount of sleep. They're probably the hardest hit. But even your average everyday 9 to 5 worker who tries to go to bed at 10 o'clock and wake up at 6, but has terrible sleep and ends up staying up too late and maybe drinks too much alcohol and has too much blue light, before they go to bed, so they can't fall asleep. If they're chronically underslept, their cortisol is going to be high. Their leptin and their ghrelin, which are their sort of hunger and satiety hormones, are going to be all out of whack. And so your hormonal system is going to be thrown off and you're going to make poor choices and you're going to be craving things that you wouldn't normally crave. I mean, there's a reason we make poor choices when we're underslept. Not only is our sort of frontal lobe cortex of our brain not making good choices, but our body is telling us to crave different things because our hormones are all out of whack. And it can raise your blood pressure. It can increase incidence of depression. I mean, poor sleep can impact so many different aspects of our life. And, there's that old saying that Steve Jobs and Thomas Edison were the two worst people in the world for sleep hygiene because of the light bulb and the iPad and the iPhone, because those are the things that are keeping us up later than we should. That's one of the biggest impacts you can have on your sleep, is to reduce your exposure to electronics and start to dim the lights a little bit. Doesn't mean you have to live by candlelight, but you start to dim the lights a little bit an hour before bedtime to prepare your body for sleep. That it's almost like a badge of honor. I can get by on 4 hours of sleep. I only slept 2 hours last night, but I'm okay. I'm good to go. It's not a badge of honor. You're destroying your body. It would be like a badge of honor saying, yeah, I smoked 2 packs of cigarettes yesterday instead of just 1. It's the same sort of concept. You're doing something purposely unhealthy for your body and bragging about it. And I don't see that. You really have to prioritize sleep, and that's going to impact every aspect of your health.
Yeah, sleep is paramount for me. I prioritize it above everything personally. And I can just see the people listening to this saying, oh, that's not me. I only need 5 hours, 6 hours. I'm fine. I feel good. But what's most telling is some of those studies they do where people are on 5 or 6 hours of sleep and they say, how good do you feel? And they say, I feel great. And then they give them a cognitive test and they perform just as bad as people who they've sleep deprived for like 48 hours straight.
I love that study.
Most interesting.
I quoted that study in my book because I just love that study, because that is so telling, because it really impairs your realization of what's going on and your awareness of what's going on.
Yeah.
So true. And look, things happen, right? My kid was up one night and had an earache, and it happened to be on a night I was on call, and I got paged a bunch for the hospital, and I had an awful night of sleep, and it's going to happen. But the key is to recognize it and treat your day a little bit differently, right? You're going to need to do things differently. You're going to need more breaks. You might need to take a little nap, and it means you have to try and get to bed a little bit earlier the next night to make up for it. It's not, you just forget about it and say, it's no big deal. I'm tough. I can tough it out. No, it's okay to give yourself a special dispensation after you have a real bad night of sleep.
Yeah, completely agree. There's some weird stigmas around sleep. And Bret, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you specifically about a zero carb diet or carnivore diet. I know you've spoken with Sean Baker, I believe, on your show, or you're at least around the space. So I'd love to get your views on both how a high saturated fat or animal fat diet, such as a carnivore diet, could help or hurt our risk of cardiovascular disease, and also, some things that you would see as potentially negatives.
Yeah. So one of the first things that fascinate me about the carnivore diet is the vegan reaction of how restrictive it is and how unhealthy it is. And how limited it is, as opposed to the vegan diet, which there's actually no historical basis for and is incredibly restrictive and limited, and you need to take all these supplements, whereas the carnivore diet, you don't. So I don't quite get the battleground there. But anyway, that's, I guess, a bit of an aside. But the carnivore diet I find fascinating. when I first learned about it, of course, my first reaction was, oh, that's a terrible idea. That's awful. And that's the 20 years of medical teaching, in my brain. And then when I actually had time to sit and think about it, I'm like, well, let me actually think about this. So there are historical populations who have lived this way for generations and have done pretty well with it. And there are plenty of anecdotal evidence of people really thriving on this type of diet. And it really is a pretty complete diet. You're not missing a whole lot that your body actually needs. So why not try it? But then the thing is, as with any dietary change, you follow your markers, right? You have to follow what your lipids are doing, what your inflammatory markers are doing, what your insulin and glucose are doing, what your weight and your blood pressure and your energy level and all those things are doing. And Shawn Baker's become the poster child of this movement, which is good and bad, and because he is unbelievable. I mean, that guy is just out of this world. So it's amazing to see someone thrive like that, but it's also almost a negative to the movement because we can't all try and be Shawn Bakers. We cannot hold ourselves up to a Shawn Baker standard. And other people like Georgie Eads and Amber Ahern, they seem more like the everyday person example of the carnivore movement.
Right.
But every single one was doing well on a keto diet and then sort of started to see some problems that they wanted to figure out that completely reversed on a zero carb diet. And look, if you're going to feel better and because of that be a happier person and take better care of yourself, I'm all for that. Just do it in a smart way where you're monitoring your lab values, your CIMT, where you're looking at all different aspects of your health to make sure nothing's changing for the worse. And if it's not, more power to you. Keep it going. I would never just pejoratively say, nope, shouldn't do it because I'm concerned of X, Y, and Z. Well, let's monitor for X, Y, and Z if you're feeling better doing it. And that's the key. There's all this thing about, well, what about all the fiber? Isn't fiber important? Well, sure. If you're eating a lot of carbohydrates, then fiber is very, very important. But if you're not eating carbohydrates, maybe fiber is not as important. The whole thing about gut bacteria and don't we have to feed the gut bacteria? Well, if we're not giving them a bunch of simple sugars and simple carbohydrates, maybe how we feed the gut bacteria is very different. So it's this whole different concept of seeing things differently, being able to evaluate it, not just out of the perspective of the way we've been doing things for the past 30, 40 years, but being able to evaluate it as something new, worthy of discussion and worthy of exploration.
Yeah, that's a really educated answer. And I like how you contextualize it, both in terms of how there's not a lot of evidence out there today, and how it can seem sort of extreme and way out of left field at first. But, there are a lot of unanswered questions in nutrition, such as with the gut biome and fiber and things like this. And I think absolutely taking an educated approach and monitoring your health as you do it is really key. And Bret, I'd love to just ask you a little bit about your new podcast, the Diet Doctor podcast. What are some of your goals for the new show and what inspired you to go on with the Diet Doctor?
Well, the second question's easy to answer. What inspired me? I mean, once I met Andreas and got connected with him, I was sold. I mean, that guy and his company is amazing.
Yeah.
There are some companies and some people in this world that once you meet and learn about, you're just like, I want to work with this person. I want to work in this type of a company culture because they're just their integrity and their mission and their goals. And I mean, it's hard to see that and hard to find that in other places. They don't sell ads. They don't want, to put out clickbait. They don't want just to try and get everybody's money and complicate their website with all these different ads and sell different things and supplements. And they're not in it for that. They're in it to create a culture of integrity and helping people improve their lives. And anybody can say that, but at Diet Doctor, they really do it. And, Andreas is quick to point out that it's not just him, it's a whole team, but he helped create that team. And so once I met him and talked to him about his personal beliefs and his company culture, I was in. And look, they are the most popular website, low carb website in the world by a long shot. And there's a reason for that. So being able to have their backing and their support is amazing. And they are sticklers for quality, and I think it shows. The video quality of the Gary Taubes podcast interview blew me away, and I was there. I was physically there doing the interview, but when I saw it on YouTube, I was like, wow, this looks fantastic. I mean, they're artists in addition to promoting low carb and putting out the information. So I really, really appreciate that aspect of them. And, our goal is to make low carb living simple, to get the information out there to so many people, to try and dissect the science. I mean, I'm all about trying to see the details of the science, but do it in a way that people can understand it and tie it back to practical tips that people can walk away with. So I want to interview as many of the big personalities and get into some of the controversies and clarify a lot of the science and help people understand how this could be a good way of living and maybe why it wouldn't be a good way of living for some people, but to help people make up their own minds and to just reach more and more people to help spread this word. Because, certainly from the medical field, we need a revolution of understanding that low carb living is an absolute weapon that we should be using to help people transform their lives. And a lot of times that's going to happen from the patient themselves, from the patient walking into their doctor empowered, hopefully, from multiple different arenas. But if it's because they heard one of my podcasts and that empowers them and educates them and they're willing to go to their doctor and say that this is what they're going to try and help therefore educate their doctor, then that's a great way to do it. But it's just all about getting the message out there and getting it out there in a way that people can use today in their lives.
Yeah, well, I'm super inspired, Bret, and I'm going to be there waiting for every single episode to come out. I've really enjoyed your podcast to date, and following the Diet Doctor is great. I feel like I'm so engaged with the videos and the interviews there. It's really, really high quality. Well, where else can people find out more about you, Bret?
Yeah, thanks for asking. The best place is my website, lowcarbcardiologist.com. I've got a blog. I've got my book. You can learn more about the Balanced Health membership program there. And I'm on Twitter at BScherMD. That's probably my biggest social media outlet. Those are probably the best two places. And then, of course, at the Diet Doctor podcast at dietdoctor.com. Great.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Bret. You've been incredibly generous, and I think this wealth of knowledge will really help a ton of folks. So really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks, Bret. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Carnivore Cast. If you enjoyed this episode, please review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And share it with a friend. What questions would you like answered, or who would you like to hear from in the carnivore research community? You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Carnivore Cast, or go to carnivorecast.com. You can also email me at info@carnivorecast.com. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep it carnivore.